Hi, it's Lindley Oz, and let's take a look at a couple of news pieces that relate to the end times in which we're living. But before I do, I want to make my case by showing you some very eye-opening scriptures that have to do with God and the weather and God and natural disasters and so forth, because the news I'm going to share with you directly relates to the end times in which we're living. And I feel that if I show this to you first, it's going to really open your eyes and give you a deeper understanding and meaning to the news that I'm going to share. We all hear that there's weather related events and things like that in the Bible in relation to the end times, but many of us don't know what those verses are or we can't remember. So I'm going to show you this, and it's really, really eye-opening, as I just said. First, it says flooding rain. According to Genesis, when God saw the violence and wickedness of man, he was grieved in heart and vowed to destroy all but Noah and his family through a flood. I will cause it to rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, Genesis 6:4. Now, there has been strong scientific evidence for a cataclysmic worldwide flood, and the evidence, when dated, points to the time period in which the biblical flood occurred. But that's a whole different subject altogether. Next is drought. As the Israelites wandered in the wilderness on their way to the promised land, God gave them the 10 Commandments, together with many sundry laws. He warned Israel to obey them, and if they did not, then one of the consequences would be drought. Deuteronomy 28, verses 23 and 24. The heaven which is over your head shall be bronze, and the earth which is under you iron, and the Lord will make the rain of your land powder and dust. 2 Chronicles 7:13. If I shut up the heavens so that there is no rain. And 2 Chronicles 7:14 also explains that if the Israelites had sought God and turned away from their rebellious ways, then God promised to heal their land. And when some Israelites returned from exile in Babylon, they were more interested in making nice houses than in the restoration of God's house, the desolate temple. As a result, God caused drought, resulting in a lack of produce. Haggai 1:11. Next, we see violent storms and hail. The 7th plague of Egypt was severe hail because Pharaoh would not let the Israelites go. God said to Pharaoh, I will send a very heavy hail, and the hail shattered every tree of the field. Exodus 9:18 and 25. When the kings of the Amorites attacked friends of Israel, Joshua's army went up to defend them. It is recorded that God helped Israel by throwing large hailstones at the enemy. Joshua 10:11. More died from the hailstones than those killed by the sons of Israel. Later, the prophet Ezekiel challenged the false prophets of Israel, saying that God would judge them. The Lord spoke to these false prophets through Ezekiel, saying in Ezekiel 13:13, I will make a violent wind break out in my wrath, flooding rain and hailstones. When Jonah tried to ignore God's instructions by taking a boat trip, God sent a great wind and storm, Jonah 1:4, that threatened to destroy the ship. Then, in New Testament times, God reversed the situation and calmed the wind and the sea in order to save the disciples. Mark 4:39. Jesus rebuked the wind and the sea, and the wind died down, and it became perfectly calm. Again, when Ezekiel was in exile in Babylon, he challenged Israel to turn from their wicked ways. But he also spoke to the surrounding nations like Assyria and Egypt. He warned Egypt of God's coming judgment when clouds and darkness would be used as a way of arresting their attention. We read in Ezekiel chapter 30, verses 3 and chapter 32, verse 8, It will be a day of clouds, a time of doom for the nation. All the shining lights in heaven I will darken over you, and will set darkness on your land. From these few examples, we are left in little doubt that, in the past, God has used abrupt weather changes. So we have seen God's weather control in the past, just a few examples here. The Bible makes it very clear there will be a definite end to life as we know it. Earth's governmental systems, economic and trading systems, the animal kingdom, and even geology all will be changed at the second coming of Christ. Our current age is coming to a dramatic end as God deals with rebellious nations. And just before these changes, at the very end of this age, it seems God will intervene in Earth's weather. There is a verse, Isaiah 26:9, that says, "For when the earth experiences your judgments, the inhabitants of the world learn righteousness." That is the reason for God's judgment, is he wants people to learn righteousness. He wants them to repent. So back to drought and scorching heat. So we saw an example of drought and scorching heat in the past in the Bible. Now we're going to look at a futuristic drought and scorching heat. It says one of the judgments predicted by Isaiah appears to be drought. Isaiah 24:3 and 4. The earth will be completely laid waste. The earth mourns and withers. The world fades and withers. Drought is one of the consequences of disobedience. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 23 and 24. Zechariah 14:17. Another form of judgment prophesied by Isaiah appears to be extreme heat, heat severe enough to kill people. Therefore, the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men are left. Isaiah 24:6. The book of Revelation appears to speak of the same end-time events and predicts extreme weather as part of God's judgment upon the nations. There will be fierce, scorching heat. According to Revelation 16, verses 8 through 9, the fourth angel poured out his bowl upon the sun, and it was given to it to scorch men with fire. Men were scorched with fierce heat. Next, storms, torrential rain, snow, and extreme hail. When questioned about the end of the age, Jesus hints at wild weather. Luke 21:25, there will be dismay among nations and perplexity at the roaring of the sea and the waves. The root meaning of the Greek in this verse can mean nothing else but literal sea and literal waves. The word roaring comes from the Greek ekio, and I'm not sure how that's pronounced. Ekio, I don't know, but you see it on the screen, meaning to make a loud noise. Hurricanes and coastal flooding spring to mind. Torrential rain is also prophesied. Isaiah 24:18, for the windows above the floodgates of the heavens are opened. The word windows here is the same as in Genesis 7:11 and denotes an opening, like a sluice or floodgate. It seems that torrential rain, as experienced at the flood, will also feature at the end of this age as part of God's judgments on the rebellious nations. Job 38:22 and 23, or have you entered the storehouses of the snow, which I have reserved for the time of distress? It says hail features high on the weather ingredients list at the end of the age. It is part of God's judgment upon the nations. Besides fierce heat, there will be extreme hail and snowstorms. Revelation 16:8, 9, and 21, and huge hailstones, about 100 pounds each, came down from heaven upon men. Clearly, God intends to use short-term weather events to influence world affairs in the future. Since there is clear biblical support for God's control of past and future weather, it is logical to ask, is God speaking through these severe weather events that we're seeing right now? How close are we to these future events? Now, I changed the wordage there a little bit on that last part because that's the question. And as you see the news pieces I'm going to share with you. I want you to remember that question. And before I go into the news just yet, I want to share a few more verses. Job 37, 9 through 14. Let's have a look at that in the New King James Version for those of you like me who have trouble understanding King James. It says, "From the chamber of the south comes the whirlwind, and cold from the scattering winds of the north. By the breath of God ice is given, and the broad waters are frozen. Also with moisture he saturates the thick clouds. He scatters his bright clouds, and they swirl about, being turned by his guidance, that they may do whatever he commands them on the face of the whole earth. He causes it to come, whether for correction or for his land or for mercy. Listen to this, O Job. Stand still and consider the wondrous works of God." That is an awesome passage that conveys clearly God and the weather, and that he has everything to do with the weather and with natural disasters. Nahum 1:3. "The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and will not at all acquit the wicked. The Lord hath his way in the whirlwind, and in the storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet." So now, with all of that said, and there are plenty of more verses, we could go on and on, it's time for us to take a look at the news that has everything to do with end times Bible prophecy. And as I share this news with you, now that you've seen or been reminded of the evidence in the Bible, I want you to take these things very seriously and know that we have reached the end of this age as we know it. The earth strikes back. 10 signs that nature has turned against humanity. What's up with all this craziness all over the world? Let's find out, because we're living in some very biblically prophetic times. And for many, they can be frightening, and for others, they can be exciting. I guess it depends on which side of the Bible that you're standing on. If you believe in the Lord Jesus Christ as your Savior, and you love the Lord with all your heart, and you trust in him, then you have faith, and you're not afraid of these times. You may have concerns for unsaved loved ones. Perfectly natural. We need to continue to pray for our unsaved loved ones. We may have unrepentant sin. There are many things. So let's have faith. Don't be afraid. Not at all. Remember that God is in control, and he is the God that loves you and cares about you, and there's no need to freak out. All over the planet, nature is starting to behave in some very unusual ways. And unfortunately for us, a lot of the changes that we're witnessing in nature are quite detrimental for humanity. Of course, the truth is that we haven't exactly been too kind to the planet that we're living on. In fact, many would argue that we are in the process of absolutely devastating the earth, and most of us don't feel bad about it at all. So could it be possible that it is now payback time? Michael Snyder says, "Let me give you just one quick example of how we are destroying the planet. According to a recent survey of U.S. beekeepers, an astonishing 37% of all honeybee colonies were lost over the winter. Every year since 2006, the University of Maryland's nonprofit Bee Informed Partnership conducts an annual survey to determine how many bee colonies were lost over the course of the year. The 2018-2019 survey asked 4,696 U.S. beekeepers, I keep wanting to say bookkeepers, beekeepers, to report how many colonies they lost. And the preliminary results of the survey suggest that things are not looking so good. Of the more than 319,000 managed bee colonies in the survey, 37.7% were lost over the winter. This represents the largest die-off since the survey began, and a full 7 percentage points higher than the previous year. Having fewer honeybees is more than just an ecological problem. It's also an economic problem. Every year, honeybees contribute a nearly $20 billion value to U.S. crop production. Of course, we don't have to look too far to find the culprit. Just look in the mirror. We're the ones that are killing all the bees off, and in the process, we are setting the stage for an unprecedented ecological disaster. Because if all the bees suddenly vanished, human civilization would not last much longer at all. In the end, we will be held accountable for what has been entrusted to us, and it appears that we're starting to get what we deserve. The following are 10 signs that nature has turned against humanity. What are those signs? Number 1, in the middle of the country, farmers are freaking out because giant black vultures are literally eating their farm animals alive. That's right, giant black vultures literally eating these farm animals alive. And since the vultures are federally protected, well, the farmers can't do anything about it. Huh? That's nuts. Vultures are eating the farm animals alive. Farmers can't do anything about it because the vultures are federally protected. There you go. Here is an excerpt. They'll devour slimy newborn calves, full-grown ewes, and lambs alive by pecking them to death. First the eyes, then the tongue, and then every last shred of flesh. There isn't much defense against black vultures and turkey vultures, both of which are federally protected and cannot be killed without a permit. Number 2, all up and down the East Coast, Americans are becoming the victims of flesh-eating bacteria when they go into the water. Here's one recent example from Florida. So wait, first we have flesh-eating vultures. Now we have flesh-eating bacteria. A woman who cut herself while walking along the water on the Florida beach that she loved died after contracting necrotizing fasciitis, becoming the latest victim of the flesh-eating bacteria. Lynn Fleming from Ellenton, about 15 miles north of Sarasota, fell and cut herself while she was walking at Coquina Beach on nearby Anna Maria Island 2 weeks ago. At this point, things have gotten so bad that the CDC is telling people with open wounds to avoid bodies of water, especially swimming pools and hot tubs. So flesh-eating birds, flesh-eating bacteria. Now let's look at number 3. Cockroaches. It says for decades, cockroaches have been multiplying despite our best efforts to eradicate them with insecticides. But now they are developing resistance to our insecticides, and researchers are warning that this will make them invulnerable. The day that squeamish humans and exterminators have long feared may have come at last. Cockroaches are becoming invincible, or at least German cockroaches, Blatella germanica, are, according to a new study. Researchers have found that these creatures, which have long been a prevalent urban pest, are becoming increasingly resistant to almost every kind of chemical insecticide. Not all insecticides are created equal. Some degrade the nervous system, whereas others attack the exoskeleton. They also have to be left out for varying amounts of time. But many insects, including cockroaches, have evolved resistance to at least one of the most commonly used insecticides. I always use those things that you plug into your wall and it makes some high-pitched noise that humans can't hear, and it makes them run the other direction. It seems to work for a lot of different types of bugs in the house that I currently live in, but that's what I use for stuff like that. And here's an interesting fact for all of you chocolate lovers out there. Something you may not know. If you don't believe me, you're more than welcome to research it. An allergist told my mother years and years ago that there is trace amounts of cockroach feces in the chocolate that you eat. That's right, cockroach feces. And in the more higher quality chocolates, the higher up you go, the more there is. And many people who have allergies to chocolate are allergic to the cockroach feces because cockroaches live and thrive and dwell in that hot, moist environment around the cocoa plant. So if you're a chocolate lover and you've been praying to the Lord, oh dear Lord, please help me to not eat so much chocolate. I am in lust with chocolate. Your prayers have been answered this very moment as you've listened to these facts about cockroach feces and chocolate. Moving on along to number 4. Last week, it was hotter in some parts of Europe than it has ever been before. In fact, in one region in France, the temperature actually hit 114 degrees Fahrenheit. Hundreds of firefighters battled on Saturday to contain wildfires in southern France as a stifling heat wave brought record-breaking temperatures to parts of Europe, killing at least 3 people in Italy. In the Gard region, where France's highest temperature on record was registered on Friday at 45.9 degrees Celsius, that's 114 degrees Fahrenheit, scores of fires burned some 600 hectares, that's about 1,500 acres of land, and destroyed several houses and vehicles, emergency services said. And it has been extremely hellishly hot here in Ohio as well. The humidity levels are just through the roof, just as an FYI. Number 5, along the California coastline, temperatures have been so hot that mussels have actually been roasting in their shells. So if you want roasted mussels, just take a walk along the California coastline, pick up the shells, pull it open, and you have Insta-roast. You don't even have to go to a restaurant or pay any money. It'll be right there and ready. You may want to take some butter with you to, kind of melt on it to add some flavor. It says a record-breaking June heat wave apparently caused the largest die-off of mussels in at least 15 years at Bodega Head, a small headland on the northern California Bay. And SONS received reports from other researchers of similar mass mussel deaths at various beaches across roughly 140 miles of coastline. While the people who flocked to the Pacific to enjoy a rare 80-degree beach day soaked up the sun, so did the mussel beds. Where the rock-bound mollusks could have been experiencing temperatures above 100 degrees Fahrenheit at low tide, literally roasting in their shells. Now, I know I've made a couple jokes, people, but none of this really is funny. This is very, very serious. We can see these things happening, and it is a clear, definite sign to us that something isn't right. Actually, many things aren't right. Definite sign of what is coming our way. And what is coming our way is what the Bible tells us is coming And the very signs that Jesus gave to us to watch for are happening. Number 6. And of course, the East Coast is not being left out either. According to meteorologists, some portions of the East Coast could see heat index values hit 110 degrees as early as Wednesday. And there's some excerpts there about that, but let me scroll on down. Number 7, thanks to the unusually high temperatures, wasp nests are absolutely thriving across the southern U.S. In fact, one expert anticipates that there will be dozens of super nests in his area this year. Well, here in Ohio, the wasps have seemed to me extra bad, but I do live in the country and I didn't live in the country before, so I'm not sure if that is just how it is here or if there is an increase. Warmer winters contribute to these nests, Mr. Ray said. Most yellow jackets don't survive the cold months because they freeze to death or have trouble finding food. They need a fair amount of sugar and carbs, he said. The queens are the only ones who have an antifreeze compound in their blood. So normally a surviving queen will have to start a colony from scratch in the spring. With our climate becoming warmer, there might be multiple surviving queens producing more than 20,000 eggs each. Wow, that's a lot. A lot. Really. And here in Dayton, Ohio, we didn't have that bad of a winter. It didn't really stay that cold. We had a few cold days, but overall, very few. We had a couple bad snows that melted really quick, and that was about it. So this past winter wasn't that bad. And we're seeing an increase in this every year. Let's not forget the middle of the United States of America, says number 8. Meanwhile, the middle of the country is being absolutely hammered by the wettest year that it has ever experienced. And just when you thought that it couldn't possibly get any wetter, more storms are scheduled to come rolling through. And that's all it's done here is rain, 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 rain. We've had a few of these hot days. I just mentioned that, but overall, in fact, a news piece I shared with you guys in a previous video stated this. In the overall grand scheme of things, on average, I'm trying to think of the exact wordage, I believe it said it rained for 5 days for 3 months. So 5 days a week for 3 months, I believe is what it said. Rain, rain, rain. It has been a lot of rain. So you can see the report right here. It says a new system was moving through the northern plains Sunday morning and already bringing some severe storms to Minnesota. The system will attempt to bring some cooler air down from Canada, which will interact with the heat situated in the Midwest and spark storms across parts of the plains in the Midwest from Wyoming to Illinois. Oh, but we can't move along without having hail. We can't go from flesh-eating birds, flesh-eating viruses, cockroaches, wasps, bees, and everything else, and storms without bringing up hail. It says in recent months, we've also seen unusually large hail absolutely hammer communities all over the country. For example, it is being reported that some portions of Montana were just hit with baseball-sized hail. Can you imagine walking outside, and maybe some of you have experienced this? You look up into the sky and you are hit with a baseball-sized piece of ice. More than likely, you would be severely injured or die. Very dangerous. And what does that do to people's property? Their cars, their homes, everything else. And number 10, flooding. Needless to say, all of this wet weather has just continued to feed the unprecedented flooding that we've seen along our major rivers. At this point, we are being told that the horrific flooding along the Mississippi River may go beyond the end of the summer. It says the 2019 Mississippi River flood fight is going to slog deep into the summer and maybe much longer. While communities north of St. Louis are beginning the expensive path to recovery after record-breaking winter and spring precipitation and runoff, people below the Missouri River are shoveling mud from their houses and praying for a dry spell. The lower Mississippi Valley remains in a flood crisis as high water continues to swamp streets, homes, businesses, sewage and water treatment plants, and farm fields, including across some of the poorest countries in the U.S. Now, he didn't list this as one of them here, but don't forget about tornadoes and the crazy amount of tornadoes that we saw pop up around this nation and some of the great destruction that they did, including here in my general vicinity. And it was bad. They're still doing cleanup from that. They're still trying to rebuild. So the tornadoes, the increase in the earthquakes, all sorts of things going on. I just reported from Michael Snyder's website about these crazy amount of earthquakes they had out in California. More action on the New Madrid fault line here where I live. I'm on that fault line. And then of course the tornadoes. So lots of things are happening. Well, Michael says that these are 10 examples that have just been in the news during the past few days. If he wanted to cover all of the unusual events that we have witnessed so far in 2019, he would have to write an entire book. And that's true. The truth is that global weather patterns are dramatically shifting, and our planet is becoming increasingly unstable. No matter how hard humanity tries to find solutions, the reality of the matter is that things are going to continue to get worse. We have passed the tipping point. We are starting to experience the consequences for decades of exceedingly foolish decisions. We have entered the time of the perfect storm, and everything that can be shaken will be shaken. I agree with Michael, and I'm here to tell you these things are going to get worse. Jesus said, just like a woman in labor. And when a woman goes into labor, she has the labor pains. Okay, first she has the false labor where she has contractions. I believe they're called Braxton Hicks contractions. It's not the real deal yet. It's just labor pains. False labor. But here she's getting closer and closer to the due date when the baby's about to be born. She just goes to bed one night and she notices she's having some contractions. No big deal. And this has just slowly transpired over the months. And then she just lays down and suddenly she's awakened. Suddenly, out of the blue, in the middle of the night, with the real deal. Here comes the baby. She knows it is time. She frantically awakes her husband. Honey, honey, wake up, the baby's coming, the baby's coming. Well, you know what? When that baby's coming, there's nothing you can do to slow it down or stop it. It's going to come. So what does the husband do? He rushes and throws some clothes on. They climb into the car. He hauls butt and gets to the hospital and says, the baby's coming. And everybody scurries around to get this woman into the labor and delivery room and get that baby out safely. All right. Jesus compared this very hour to a woman in labor. We've been having Braxton Hicks contractions, the false labor. But I'm telling you, and I tell you now, you will suddenly awake, and it will be the real deal. It will be genuine, full-blown labor, And there's not anything you can do or that I can do or anyone else can do on this planet or beneath the planet except for God to stop what is coming. And the Bible is true. The Bible does not lie. We were given specific signs to watch for. God isn't going to stop it. Prophecy will be fulfilled. He is disgusted with this nation, the abortion, the sexual sin, the spirit of Antichrist that just seeps like nasty black ooze out of every crevice of this nation. Disgusting, the filth, the corruption. God is disgusted. God is angry. He loves his people. He loves them and values them so dearly. But God is disgusted with the sin in this nation, in this world, and he's coming to judge. The Bible tells us that. If you're out there buying into these preaching services where people are saying that God's not like that and judgment isn't coming, blah, 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 we have all this time, don't buy into it. That's great and all, and that sounds wonderful, but look at the signs. If we deny the signs and we say anything else but what the Bible says, we are calling Jesus himself a liar, because Jesus told us, when you see these things happen, when you see these things happen, we're seeing it. It's time to wake up. Time to get ready. Smell the coffee. That baby is about to be born.